Yes, thank you very much. Of course, there's always challenges when we try to do something online. Computers, how do they even work, as Bridget Crumhout would say? So I'm Michael Ducy. I work at Red Hat, and I'm here to talk to you now about why change matters now more than ever. I will say that I probably will stray a little bit from my abstract. The world has changed a lot from the time that I actually wrote the abstract, and that was only a couple months ago, if you can believe that. But you probably can because you live on this crazy, crazy planet of ours. And so, who am I? I'm sure you've seen me at some point at a DevOps Days Amsterdam event. I've been at all 8 of them now. I've also helped found DevOps Days Columbus, and I still organize that. I helped found DevOps Days Minneapolis. I have a long history in the industry as well of over 20 years of doing a number of things. You can probably say that I've done almost every role in a software organization except maybe CIO or CEO. I'm an avid distance runner, running marathons and 50Ks as well, and I'm also a woodworker. And I was a world traveler at one point, but of course now all of that is gone. So 2020, let's talk about 2020, shall we? Or let's not talk about 2020. I have a great coffee mug here. It's 3 a.m. where I'm at right now, and it says "This Week in Despair," and it's more like "This Year in Despair," right? 2020 has been really interesting, and it's thrown a lot of things at us, and it probably leaves us wondering or saying, I'll say it, what the fuck. It's challenged us in many ways, and in ways that we didn't think were possible. And I kind of want to talk about those ways that it's challenged us over the last how many months? 5 months, 6 months, depending upon where you live. And so I would ask the audience, if I had an audience to talk to right now, but I'm just looking at my computer screen, what are these numbers? And of course, these are the numbers of confirmed COVID cases that we've had, or coronavirus cases that we've had throughout the world. And unfortunately, the number of coronavirus deaths that we've had throughout the world. And, it's impacted a lot of people that I know in many, many different ways. There are people who have had loved ones passed away, not necessarily from COVID, but they've not been able to go and see them. They're not able to go through that grieving process. I know a number of people who have had it personally, and I know I'm sure there's a lot of star-crossed lovers that aren't able to go and see the one that they love as well. Because all of the borders are shut down. I've had 3 trips to the Netherlands canceled this year. I was very excited to join my first Lowlands this year. I've heard people talking about it for a number of years. But of course, all of this has been canceled and our world has been completely turned upside down. And so the world has really been forced to respond to this, and it's been forced to respond to it in a number of different ways. And in some cases, the responses have been good, and in some cases, the responses have been bad. And what's interesting is that this comes at a time where, in many cases, especially in the U.S., we're more divided than ever. Science is being challenged, facts are being challenged, and even in many places throughout the world, especially if you look at what's going on in Brazil as well. It's just a very tough time for many people, and our governments aren't actually giving us what we need to actually respond to this and to, I guess, have that basic level of human decency that we need to move forward as a nation and as a world. And the other thing that I find interesting is that our communities have really been shattered. And I mean, our tech communities, but also our communities overall. We've all been told at a certain point where we had to spend several months in the house. We've had this weird social distancing thing that's going on. Occasionally I'll meet up with friends here locally here in Columbus, Ohio, and the dynamic has changed, right? Like, you can't get close to somebody, you can't talk to somebody up close, you can't hug somebody. And I used to work at Chef with Nathan Harvey, if you know who he is, and his big thing is everybody he meets, he wants to give a hug to. And now that's completely gone, right? And when do we get back to the way that we lived before, or do we get back to the way that we lived before? And it's important because when we think about what's going on, it's like this personal connection and these people that we love and the people that we're connected to. This is probably when we need them most. However, we're forced to be isolated from them for our own safety, and I think more importantly, for others' own safety as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about DevOps and digital transformation after that very strong, deep opening, and kind of put it in the context of what's going on. And so, DevOps really came about and digital transformation really came about because of the rise of cloud and mobile. So all of a sudden, we now all have these things in our pockets and we can access practically anything in the world on this device, right? This is more powerful than the computer I had growing up as a child. Well, anything's probably more powerful than that, but it's almost as powerful as the laptop a lot of people might be carrying around. And as we've had this rise of the cloud and mobile, it's questioned how people do business and how businesses interact with their consumers. And it's really created this idea of the rise of the connected consumer. And with the rise of the connected consumer, we've all heard it, brick and mortar stores are closing, retailers are closing and shutting down because people are buying more things online. Although me personally, I still like to actually go into a store and try on clothes because like how are you going to know if you look good in it? But it's really changed the way that businesses interact with us on a day-to-day basis. And DevOps is really a response to serve digital transformation. So all of a sudden, we have this idea of digital transformation. If you want to sum it up in a definition, is this idea of how do you unlock new lines of business? Is typically the definition that's used. And so as we try to unlock these new lines of business and as we try to serve our customers via technology, via mobile, via online, we have to move faster, we have to move quicker. And so then we've seen this huge shift in IT where DevOps is essentially, to borrow a phrase from coronavirus, the new normal, right? And it's the way that we have to work to actually go and serve our consumers. And DevOps is really about community, and that's the thing that's kind of been extremely tough for me over this time, is that I want to go see my friends. I want to go see my friends in the community. I want to interact. I want to learn what they're doing. I want to share my knowledge. I want them to share their knowledge, but we can't. And one thing that I really think that's important for us to understand is DevOps is really about empathy, though, as well, right? And if we think about the fundamental ideas that were put forth and this idea of breaking down silos and understanding how somebody works and sharing, communicating, talking to our development teams, our operations teams, our security teams, our business, creating cross-functional teams that are more product-focused versus project-focused. It's really about understanding and having empathy for one another. And I think that's one of the things that we have as an opportunity as a community to keep in mind, is that this idea of empathy is extremely powerful and extremely important. It helps us connect to one another and it helps us understand what everybody is going through or what other people are going through. And I think one thing that I kind of take away from this whole coronavirus pandemic is that everybody in the world went through the same time or are going through the same time, the same thing. And we all relate to one another about how much it sucks to be stuck in your house and how much it sucks to not see your community and see your friends and see the people that you love, and how hard it is that you can't go and go to a funeral and grieve for the people that you've lost, or whatever it might be that you're not allowed to do anymore. And I think we can all empathize with one another about what's going on in the world. But I think it's important, is like this interesting conundrum that we have, is that while DevOps is about empathy and community, digital transformation is really about capitalism. And I'm not going to go on a rant of anti-capitalism here, although I might just a little bit. But like, if you think about the definition of digital transformation of unlocking new lines of business, it's about finding new ways to, not to go all Marxist, but to exploit capital and exploit your resources, right? And digital transformation is really about the individual and how do we serve the individual. And so we have this kind of very interesting conundrum in that DevOps is there to serve digital transformation, but DevOps is about community and digital transformation is about the individual. I read an interesting tweet recently where somebody said, you know, the failures of what America is going through right now is because America is a culture all about the individual, and the rest of the world, or at least the world that has solved this problem, is much more about community and much more about the collective versus then the individual. And really, digital transformation is about consumption, right? So like, how do we drive people to consume our goods at a faster rate, at a higher rate? And how do we reach out to that end user in a new way, right? And I'm kind of just highlighting this because it's very much against the idea that we've kind of put forth in this world of DevOps about the collective and about the community. And I think it's just important for us to kind of think about this because it helps us question what is the world that we want to live in? What is the new normal that we want to build as we go forward? As the world eventually comes out of this, how do we want to think about who we are as a humanity and who we are as a people? And, you know, if we think about what digital transformation has brought us, like all of these things are great. Which, by the way, Ryan there, hey, how you doing? And some of these things have been extremely critical to us in this time, right? Like, could we have gotten by without Netflix during this time where we're locked in our house? And could we gotten by without food delivery services, or, you know, Albert Heijn being able to deliver us food, or, you know, Via Vino or whoever it might be? But are these things actually changing the world for the positive? Are they actually addressing the issues in the world? Are they actually addressing the inequalities? Or do they actually just serve the individuals that have privilege, the individuals that have access, the individuals that are don't have the needs that others do, right? And so it's kind of important for us to think about this, that as we go through this journey and as we go through thinking about what we do and as we come out of this new normal, I think it's really important that we ask ourselves, are the companies that we're working for actually contributing for the good, or are they just opportunistic? And are they just trying to leverage capital? And are they just trying to be the next unicorn that's sold for $1 billion? And so really the question is what does digital transformation do to serve people? And a good example of that is in the United States, we've had 40 million people lose their jobs as part of this. And I think it's really important to kind of highlight in the fact that there's absolutely no social safety net in the US. So like, these people have lost their jobs. They've went on unemployment, which is kind of a temporary thing. We've had to fund those unemployment bureaus throughout the different states in the United States. And all of a sudden you have this gigantic rush of people that are trying to go and register for unemployment. And so you've built a system that's probably written in COBOL, which is true story. Just look at what happened in New Jersey. And all of a sudden you went from maybe serving 100 people a day or 500 people a day to all of a sudden having to serve 180,000 people a day, and you're running this legacy system. So have we actually used digital transformation to actually change people's lives and make it easier to access the services that are needed to actually respond to this type of pandemic? Or are we just using digital transformation because I drank too much in Amsterdam and I need to get back to my house and I'm calling an Uber, right? And I think it's important that we think about that of how are we using this digital transformation to serve the greater good, or are we just enabling those people that have access and have privilege? And so it kind of sum it up, what does digital transformation and I would also say, what does DevOps do to serve these underserved people? How do we lift people up? And so, what does digital transformation do to serve the underprivileged, the poor, the oppressed, and overall society? And I think it's an important thing that we all start to think about as we come out of this, as we start to go back to our jobs, as we walk into our office. I feel like in the 13 years that I've been traveling the world and talking to a bunch of different people, I feel like I probably met maybe one or two people where this idea of digital transformation is actually about serving those people that are listed out there. And one great example, gentleman by the name of Sam, who lives in Melbourne, Australia, and he works in IT, works in operations, and the app that they have is for homeless people, and the homeless people a lot of homeless people have phones. It's important that those people have phones. Let's not get into the debate of you can't feed yourself, why do you have a phone? But they have this phone and they have this application, and Sam is responsible for helping make sure, or he was responsible for making sure this application works. And these homeless people can go and find out where's the nearest shelter, where's the nearest place that they can go and get food, where's the nearest place that they can go get medical care and go to a clinic and other things like that as well. And those are very, very important things for that person. And the fact that they have that phone and they have that access and they have that access to that information to where they can actually improve their lives is extremely important to try and lift them up. So I'm going to kind of shift gears here. So at least in the United States, we've had something going on over the last 6 years. In 2014, a young man by the name of Mike Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. That really touched me in a lot of ways and kind of really made me think about what's going on in our society and going on in the United States. I grew up in St. Louis. Ferguson, Missouri is right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. It's one of the suburbs. It's a suburb on the north side of St. Louis. And I used to drive through there every single day when I was going to university. And you would see what these people actually lived through. And, regardless of what Mike Brown might have did or didn't do and his interaction with police, I think it's important to understand is that if he stole a candy bar or whatever he did, or if he mouthed off to a police officer, or even if he tried to hit a police officer, he didn't deserve to lose his life. And in 2014, this idea of Black Lives Matter really started to find its momentum. And I won't get into the debate of, yes, every life is precious, but you have to understand that there are people in the world that are systematically oppressed and do not have the opportunities that we have or I have as a 40-year-old white male living in America. And even as somebody living in America, we still have these systems that are built from legacy systems, right? I guess to put it in technical terms, these are legacy systems that were built a number of years ago, 400 years ago, when slavery was there, and slavery was the thing that we did, and colonialism and imperialism was rampant throughout the world or growing throughout the world. And these systems are put in place at a very early stage. And while we try and change them, just like we try and modernize our technology and we try to move to containers or we try to move to VMs, you still have that technical debt that you bring on. And I think this idea of oppression and this idea of every person isn't equal is our technical debt as a society. And so a little bit more about me. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, as I said. Google it if you don't know where it is, but it's almost right in the middle. I went to a high school that was 70% Black, and I had a lot of friends that were Black as well. And I saw it on a day-to-day basis. We would be walking down the street as a group of guys or group of kids, 16, 15, 14 years old, and police car would pull up and they would stop us. And they would stop us only for the reason because of how we looked, right? Because of how we dressed and because of the color of my friend's skin. And if you haven't been in that situation, you don't understand what those people go through on a day-to-day basis. And as I went through that, and as I've grown up and as I've become a man, I think it's very important to reflect back on that and remember that, and that just because of the color of your skin, you can be treated fundamentally different than everyone else. And it's not because you did anything, and it's not because you were up to no good. It's just because how you looked, right? And St. Louis is a very interesting place. For a number of years, we had something called the Veiled Prophet Parade, and this was our July 4th parade. So if you're not familiar with the U.S., July 4th is, of course, our Independence Day. It's where we like to blow things up. We just had it over the last weekend, and yes, I blew some things up. But it's also where the Dred Scott case was filed as well, and I encourage you to look up the Dred Scott case and a lot of other very kind of poignant moments in race relations in the U.S. started. But it's a very, very segregated city, even to this day. And schools are so bad in the inner city of St. Louis that there was something called desegregation, and so kids that lived in inner city St. Louis and were of a minority could actually go to the suburban schools to actually help out building a racial balance between the different schools. But that doesn't this kind of like forced desegregation doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to accept you and treat you as an equal. You're just going to see that somebody is being forced into your face versus understanding who that person is and accepting that person for who they are. And this article had a number of good quotes in it. I think this was a Gawker article. And I'll just read this out. And this is extremely true. Like, this is my experience of growing up in St. Louis. White people avoid North City. Black people avoid much of South City, South County, and West County, and that's that. Try being Black and driving through a city like Ladue, which is a very rich area, or even worse, St. Charles or some places in Jefferson County. And the fun part is that the metro area just keeps getting more and more spread out as white people move further and further away from the scary Black people that populate the city or the inner ring suburbs. And one of those inner ring suburbs is Ferguson, Missouri. And another much more poignant point, as a Black person who grew up there, fuck that place. And as a white person that grew up there, fuck that place as well. It's one of the number one reasons why I decided to move away from St. Louis is because of the race relations. And I guess you can say it's a good thing for myself, but it's also a bad thing for the broader community because I'm just abandoning it and not actually trying to improve it. But this is something that happens throughout the United States, and I don't think we, and not only the United States, but throughout the world. I don't think we really understand until you actually go into those neighborhoods. And we don't go into those neighborhoods. We avoid those neighborhoods, right? Everyone knows the bad neighborhoods in their city, and you don't drive through them intentionally. And you don't drive through them, partly because you're trying to avoid the crime or anything like that. But are we driving through them because we don't want to be reminded of that there are these people who live like this, and that we're part of the problem, that are actually contributing to these people um, being less fortunate that we are, or are not being lifted up the way that they should be lifting up, or our society not taking care of them the way that they should be taken care of as a human being. I think it's a really important thing for us to understand, is that, the level of poverty that a lot of these people see, and I think it's very important for us in tech, because in tech, most of us make really good money. In the US, I know it's a little bit higher than the rest of the world, but we have good jobs, we have opportunity, we have the ability to actually raise ourselves up if you have a job in tech and change your world in a dramatic way. And sometimes maybe we don't drive through those parts of the city because it reminds us of the fact that we're not doing what we need to do to actually help raise these people up. And I think it's kind of important. It's just something you have to reflect on, of like, this is real. This is people's day-to-day lives. And so you have these people that have no opportunity. You have these people that are dependent upon the state. And when you don't do what's needed for these people, to give these people the basics to live their life, what do you expect that you're going to get, right? This is a good, interesting graphic from the Census Bureau of the United States, and of course, this is data from the U.S. But the economic disparity is real, and I think that's what's really important about this graph, is that if you're of a certain race, you're guaranteed to make more money. You're guaranteed to have more opportunity. And I think it's very important for us. In the DevOps community, we've talked a long time about inclusion and diversity. And I think it's very important for all of us to focus on that, because we have the opportunity to close this gap. Not only do we have the opportunity to close the gap between gender imbalance, and in the United States, women make 75 cents for every dollar that a man makes. We have the opportunity to close that gap. But inclusion and diversity is just not about the gender mix of our conferences and our workforce. It's also about the racial mix of our workforce and our conferences as well. And how can we help, as the people that are privileged, raise those people up? And that, I think that's why I talk about this so much, is because I have the privilege. I have a bias when people look at me, that they think a certain thing. And so it's important that we who have that privilege use our voice to lift people up. And there's been a huge movement in the United States around this idea of defunding the police. And I just want to talk about that for a second. In that, if you look at this graph and see how much is spent on welfare programs versus law and order, we've really shifted away from taking care of our people. And what we're doing is we're very much investing in control versus uplifting people. And this whole idea of defunding the police in the United States is not that we don't want police because we don't need them. The idea is that if you invest in people, you won't need the police, because people actually have opportunity, and people don't need to go out and rob a store to feed their family. People don't need to go out and do these things because they have no other opportunity in the world. They're actually educated, and they're actually able to provide for their families, and they're actually able to make themselves productive citizens of the United States and the world. And it's this idea that a rising tide lifts all boats, right? If you're in the water, if you're in the ocean, and the tide comes in, it doesn't matter who you are, but you're going to lift up with the water, right? And we really need to think about how we start lifting up the water for everyone. And so we really need to invest in lifting up the lowest. I think as we talk about DevOps, and as we talk about technology, and we talk about digital transformation, we have to start really, really focusing. And I think this whole coronavirus and pandemic has really, really started to emphasize that, at least for me, and I hope for you as well, is that it's important that the lowest of our society, from an economic perspective, need to have their basic needs taken care of. And it makes us all better in the end. And I think the other thing that's really important is we have to take care of our technical debt as a society. We really have to really think about destroying these systems of oppression that were set up hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And as a white male, you know, using my voice to destroy these systems of oppression is extremely important, because whether if it's right or wrong, people listen to me, right? And I wish they listened to other people too, but if I have a voice, then I feel like I need to use it to help to break down these systems of oppression that have been set up for hundreds of years. And I hope anyone else out there that's listening or watching that have that voice start to really think about how they can use that voice to break down these long-standing systems of oppression. And so I'm going to end with something that I found a number of years ago. It comes from a book called Brilliant Orange. But of course, everyone who's Dutch who's watching this probably understands this. This is from a chapter of Brilliant Orange that talks about racism in Dutch football. I'm a huge football fan. Very disappointed that I was not in Europe this year for Euro 2020. Hopefully next year, knock on wood. And there's a Dutch saying that says, I will not read the Dutch because I will butcher it, but the translation is, act normal, that's crazy enough. And if you're dark, you do stand out. Is that racism? Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just Dutch. And I think this is not an attack on the Dutch or anything. I love the Dutch. I hope to one day live in the Netherlands. But I think that it's important to understand, because that statement at the end is just reinforcing that idea that, it's just built into what we do. It's built into society. It's built into our culture. It's built into who we are. I'm sure there's a number of statements you could probably find about the US as well. But I think it's just important for us to kind of sit back and reflect about what is our culture, what is our history, and do we want to be the ones that change it? And so we have a unique opportunity, and the opportunity that we have is asking ourselves, do we decide to lead this change? Do we decide to be part of the movement? And I feel like in 2020, we've really, really hit a turning point. In 2014, there weren't Black Lives Matter protests all over the world. I watch a lot of Premier League, English Premier League, and at the beginning of every English Premier League game, everyone on the pitch and on the bench kneels for a number of seconds, and some of the players raise their fist in the air, and they pay tribute to this idea that Black lives do matter. And I think it's important for us to really ask ourselves, are we going to be part of the solution, or are we going to be part of the problem? Or not part of the problem, but are we going to let these systems of oppression kind of persist? And so with that, thank you very much. I'll be online for a little bit. If you want to hit me up, there's my Twitter handle over in there in the corner. But I thank you very much for listening to me today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for that very deep and complex talk. That was a really insightful way of talking about some of the systemic issues that we face in our societies. I've been watching the comments in the chat to see if there are any questions from people regarding what you were talking about. I didn't see anything obvious, so I just came up with a couple that I thought I might ask you myself. So
Sure.
Could you perhaps give some examples of how we could raise underprivileged people up in our workspace, in a DevOps style?
Yeah. So I think if you've ever reviewed resumes to interview someone, and, I'll admit I've done this myself. Sometimes you're flipping through them and you see a name and you're like, nope. And I'm very ashamed to admit that I've done this before. But I think it's really important that we start building programs to bring STEM into these communities and to help get these people into our community, our DevOps community. And I think, we've done a really good job of we've done an attempt. Let me say that. And I think the core organizers have been very, very focused on this idea of inclusion and diversity for a number of years. But bringing technology and bringing these jobs and bringing these opportunities to communities are, I think, very, very important. And it's something that we can do, right? And there's a number of people who are hiring managers. So go through an implicit bias training. Start to use tools, and there's a number of tools out there that actually will scrub resumes for you so that they're non-biased or remove any bias that you might have from the resume. So when you look at the resume, you actually look at the person based upon their attributes and not based upon who you think they are. And I think it's really fundamental that we start to do this, because that's how we can start to rise all the boats.
Great, thank you very much. I had one other question. How can the DevOps culture contribute to the current challenges we're facing on a societal level?
No, that's deep.
I think your talk was very deep.
I think
I thought I would give a same question.
Thanks, Andy. I'll make you buy me a beer later, one day. So,
deal.
I think it's this idea of empathy. We've talked about empathy for a number of years in the DevOps community, and I think it's very important that we take this idea of empathy and apply it not only to what we do at a work perspective, but apply it to other parts of our lives. But it's also important that we go and we try and educate those people in our lives that may not have empathy and may not have understanding. I think empathy is an extremely, extremely powerful tool. And when you actually see someone, like I can remember driving through slums in Bangalore, rolling in an Audi A8, and the driver was all proud that, like, this is the only Audi A8 or the second Audi A8 in all of Bangalore. And then you see these people that are living in, a water drainage pipe with a tarp as their only protection. And I, ask myself, like, am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem? And there's a lot of people in the world that that don't even know that that exists, right? And the more that we can help build empathy in the world and understanding that there is division, that there is an inequality, I think that's when we can start to really help to understand or help to at least scratch this problem, right? It's not going to be the end all, but you know, there's the saying, if you walk 100 miles in somebody's shoes, then you understand them. And we just don't walk in somebody else's shoes enough, I think.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for waking up so early at 3 a.m. to give this amazing keynote for us all. We're very, very grateful. The final thing I'll leave out is, oh, absolutely, it's been an honor. We had a poll in the chat today asking, or over Michael's keynote, asking about your favorite drink. And at the moment, it looks like coffee is winning. So, Michael, you'll be a little bit disappointed that whiskey didn't win, but coffee is up there.
Well, I have coffee and whiskey right now, so.
That's a good combo.
So. It's always 5 o'clock somewhere, right? So I'll hand it over to Flo. Thank you again, Michael, and wish you a pleasant night's sleep.
Thank you very much.